Hello, hello. Welcome
Hello.
to another episode of Gentle Power. We are super excited to have our guest here today, Kevin Houng. And I will read Kevin's intro.
Before you read his intro,
Yeah.
how do we know Kevin?
So, Kevin and I was just about to get into it. I wasn't sure if I should share this or not,
You
but I think it is
should, of
relevant,
course. He's
which
one of your closest
yeah,
friends.
Kevin is one of my longest and closest friends. We knew each other from since middle school. So 2001. We've known each other for over 20 years.
Wow.
When we in the first years of our friendship, I remember many weekend days where I would go over to his house and we would just play Halo, the campaign on Xbox for the first Xbox. This is how long ago it was. And we'd play video games and go eat fast food, Jack in the Box, and
Yeah.
but it's super awesome to have Kevin joining us on our podcast here.
Did
Uh,
you say what city you guys were in?
so we grew up in Irvine,
Yeah,
in Orange
yeah.
County.
Okay.
So
Spoiled little brats.
okay, all the Irvinites will probably want a word with you. No,
She's
but it
like perfect weather, perfect safety, safest town in the US.
I think Gerta
I'm a
feels that
little
way.
jealous. I'm a
Yeah,
little
she's jealous
jealous.
because she is a child of war, grew up in war-torn Albania, where there was a lot of civil unrest. But to be fair, Irvine is a wonderful. It was an
Yeah.
amazing place to grow up.
No,
Picture
it's
perfect
so
California
beautiful.
suburb. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So let me share with our audience Kevin's intro. And Kevin would also love for you to share and add any color as well. But for our guest today, Kevin Houng, he is a seasoned negotiation strategist who blends the precision of an employment attorney with the tactical acumen of a people operations leader. As a trusted compensation business partner, he's navigated complex pay structures, advised executives on equitable and cost effective packages, and guided organizations through pivotal workforce changes. Kevin has orchestrated global restructurings, launched over 60 venture backed teams. Wow, that's a lot.
Wow.
Executing rapid workforce transitions in record time. His unique mix of legal expertise and operational leadership makes him a master at navigating tough conversations and securing win-win outcomes.
Love that.
And Kevin, do you want to add anything for our audience just to have our listeners familiarize themselves a bit more with your background and your experience?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that kind intro. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast. You know, I love watching your past videos, and it's always great to see my friends start new businesses. So big props to both of you, and I'm really happy to see where this is going for y'all.
Wow.
Really excited for the journey. I started off my career, well, actually, before my career, I went to school at USC for undergrad finance, and then I went to law school at Columbia Law School and graduated in 2015. Right after law school, I started off my career as an attorney. I did labor and employment. And so generally this is what you think of as like discrimination, harassment, retaliation. This
Mm-hmm.
moved towards pay equity. Obviously in California that became like a pretty big issue 2015, 2017. And then I decided to make a career change. I didn't love being an attorney, and so I moved to human resources. And that actually is not, it sounds kind of crazy when I say it now, but in the moment, it was actually fairly logical because labor and employment and
Yeah.
HR, they generally work very closely and they're very aligned in a lot of their work streams. And so I worked at a medical clinic during COVID. That was very interesting. And then I moved towards a crypto ATM company. And after that, I landed at Protocol Labs, the founder of Filecoin. And about a year ago, there was a team of us at Protocol Labs that spun off into a company called Polaris. So Polaris comes from the word for North Star. And our goal is to be the North Star of the Protocol Labs network, which is an innovation network. And so essentially what we do is we analyze the data within our network, we take a look at all the teams, and we try to ensure that all of our teams are as successful as possible and they have the tools that they need to compete.
And just to clarify, so this is a blockchain crypto company, right?
Correct. Right.
Very
And
Web3,
cool.
blockchain, crypto. Yeah.
and when you said you worked on labor and employment, right? Was that on were you representing mostly employer side?
Yes. So I worked for Shepherd Mullen. We generally I don't think we don't do plaintiffs. We're not plaintiffs counsel. We generally do defense litigation. And so this would be for large enterprise clients. Some of my larger clients were like Taco Bell or like Chipotle, Whole Foods.
Okay, so you're pretty much always you were representing the employer.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
got it. Just to squeeze the squeeze the helpless employees out of every cent.
Well, and for our business, we focus solely on helping the job seekers or
Yes,
the
we're
employees.
the good guys.
So typically, if Kevin and Garrett and I were all involved in a negotiation, we'd probably be sitting we'd be sitting
Opposite.
across from each
Okay.
other
Yes.
at the negotiation table. But unless there was
But
one,
then he left because he couldn't handle being the bad guy.
yeah.
I mean, I still work in-house for a company, so
It's true.
technically I represent large organizations still.
I'm just joking.
Well, so unless there was a specific question
Go
or a
ahead.
topic that you wanted to go to start from, I was thinking something that our listeners are probably very interested in is hearing how, when job seekers negotiate against a company, what is happening on the company side? Because with a lot of our clients, a lot of people that we talk to, they're always very scared to negotiate. It's a very common thing. They're worried that if they negotiate, they might push things too hard. The company might rescind the offer, and they just start going into
Yeah.
this doom spiral of worrying.
Mhm.
Can I ask that we start even sooner first, which is, let's say there's an open seat, whether it's new or someone left. Like, how do you determine the budget? Who goes in that meeting and it's like, hey, this is how much we think we should pay? How fixed is the budget? And I also assume that a lot of this varies by company and team and company size and all that. So you can say this aspect varies and this is pretty much the same everywhere.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So when I worked for CoinCloud and that company was the crypto ATM company, they went through bankruptcy, and so I can speak pretty freely here.
Nice.
Um, that company I helped scale from under 100 to over 200, closer to 300.
Nice.
And so I've worked on companies from all sizes. I'm at a company of around 12 to 14 right now.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of different considerations to think about. First is what stage is that company at? And so generally startups, if they're pre-seed or seed, they have very limited budgets and they probably don't even have a dedicated HR person
Yeah.
on staff. It might be chief of staff that's handling HR. A lot of times it's the founder and the CEO that's handling HR for the first, 12, 18 months. As you become a more mature company, you're moving to like 50 to 100, you start to have more formal HR positions in your company. And so there tends to be a little bit more structure. And the reason why I'm crafting my answer like this is because first I would identify what stage the company is. Then you can kind of figure out how much structure
Mhm.
that company actually has. So for example, like Facebook, Google, when you're onboarding and offboarding probably like 1,000 or over 1,000 employees per month, you have to think about what processes are very scalable. And so generally larger enterprise companies, they have something we call salary bands when the recruiters go out. And actually in California and New York, there is certain legislation that requires employers to post the salary band in the job descriptions, right? And so if you are living in either one of those states, I would definitely ask if it's not already posted in the LinkedIn job profile or the job description, I would definitely ask for that salary band to kind of gauge what the income level could potentially be at. I will say a lot of times those bands are also negotiable. So I want to look at that as like black and white. For the most part, I know this is going to sound really odd, but larger organizations are probably going to be less likely to negotiate with you. And the reason being is um,
It's more
there's been some
competitive,
studies.
right? Yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
I assume it's more competitive. Like more people want to work at Facebook versus some random startup.
It's that, but also you have to think about the time of the recruiters, right? And so, a lot of times like Meta does have internal recruiting, but a lot of roles they supplement their in-house HR with external recruiters. And those individuals usually get paid a commission based on like a yearly salary. It could be 1 month, 2 month, 3 months of the yearly salary that gets paid to the recruiting agency. And so I would think about what resources the company has to really negotiate the offers. Larger companies, because they're worried about like pay discrimination, and what I mean when they say pay discrimination, it means like differences in pay between men and women, but also between different races, right? It could be a lot of different, whatever protected category there is, you want to think about pay equity. And so a lot of companies, you know, will think about this and say, hey, if I am gearing my compensation towards people that are better at negotiating, does that favor one race over another? Does that favor one culture over another? Does that favor, yeah, it could favor anyone, right?
Yeah.
And so to try to normalize that, a lot of companies, they just have what we called career ladders.
Mhm.
And I've never worked for this company, so this isn't like an endorsement, but if you're trying to work for a larger organization like Meta or Netflix, any of the Mag 7, there is a compensation benchmarking provider called levels.fyi.
Yes.
They're really great at looking for at your particular level, like what is generally the pay range.
Yeah.
And they go even deeper than that. They will have base salary, they will also have performance, they will also have equity.
Yeah.
And so they have, and then some of them, some companies, they even have information on benefits.
I have a
Like,
question on levels because
mhm,
I used to work at salary.com where I was advising hundreds of various companies from local government to big tech companies on how to pay their employees. And at salary.com, we had a free tool and then we also had
mhm.
a paid tool. And the free tool that people could just Google, it was actually employee reported data. So as we imagine, it's very biased. Who's coming in to report their data to begin with? And do they remember all the details? Are they sharing the truth and all that? Versus the one that we would sell to the companies was employer reported data. And if I remember correctly, we were actually pulling this. It wasn't someone telling you numbers, but we were actually pulling it from HR systems. I haven't done a super thorough research on levels.fyi, but just logically, I feel like they assume they also have this sort of, if it's free data that we can all search on levels.fyi, it's probably not super accurate versus the paid data they might be offering.
Yeah, so levels actually, so I was on the employer side. I've been both a customer
Mm-hmm.
as a private consumer and
Oh,
also
great.
a
Yeah.
customer on the employer side from Levels. Levels does do some internal validation of the data. And so they have a great team over there. They validate the data. They even have the confidence scoring for probably a lot of the data points. Obviously, the employers get the clean data, but you are correct in that it is employee generated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really just, I could go on there. I work for Polaris. I could report my income if I wanted to. And basically, it's a give to get
Yeah.
model, right? You give your data and then you get the employer data in return. Although it's not the most accurate, I would also question the assumption that employer data is accurate. And the reason being, unless you're pulling it directly from the ATS, which
Right.
very few companies other than Pave do. Most
Mm-hmm.
companies, the HR team will upload a CSV to whatever the benchmarking provider is, and they kind of just like upload that
Mm-hmm.
data directly. That data can also be manipulated on the
For sure.
employer side, right? Because there could be things that you don't want to
You don't
share.
want to share. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. As
So
a
Like
company,
the
like trade secrets. Yeah.
Yeah, like the company. Well, first of all, if they're just uploading CSVs, who knows how outdated that is? If it's not
yeah,
up
or
to
you
date,
remove all the like
yeah.
sign-on bonuses
Or
or
yeah,
something. Yeah,
exactly. Or
yeah,
in some cases, maybe they want to make it seem like they pay a lot more, so they make their ranges wider or higher. So that's also a good point that the
yeah,
employer reported data may not necessarily be
yeah.
accurate as well.
So this brings us to this point that I'm very curious about. Based on first principles, even though there's pay bands and all that, every role has also internal factors why they might be paying above market or below market. Below market, it could be they just didn't get enough budget approval for whatever reason. Maybe things are tight in the company. Or above market could be because they have some exciting product launch or they're fundraising or they will get some media attention and all that. I'm curious from your perspective, having been on the inside and being on the inside, what does that look like? Again, going back to my original question, there's an open seat, and if it varies by company size and if it's a new seat or an old seat, let us know. But there's an open seat. How is the budget determined? How firm is it? Yeah, I would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I know this is going to sound like a really lawyer answer. It depends
It
on
depends. No, I know it totally depends, but like,
but it depends on the scale of the company
yeah,
and what stage they're at, right? So like if you're a startup and you're hiring for like a CTO or any sort of software developer, software engineer,
yeah,
you're probably going to be fairly flexible with your compensation,
right,
right? Because you need the talent to, for example, like get your MVP out, etc.
yeah. But
When
you
when you're
also
a
have
large,
more restrictions in terms of budget. If you're a startup, you don't
correct.
have that much runway. Yeah.
Correct, but usually also you have to know that for a startup, if it's like 10 people, the person doing the salary negotiations is probably the founder.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
probably
totally.
the
Yeah.
CEO who, and so like sometimes negotiation, the ultimate, like that's the decision maker, right? When you're at a larger
Yeah.
company, there are multiple levels of approvals that need to occur. So generally you'll have like a hiring manager, someone that's managing the hiring process. You will oftentimes have an external recruiting team. And so the recruiter you're actually talking to is probably not even employed at that company. A lot of times they're vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will have like a recruiting contact, and then you might have a people manager. You'll have a manager that individual is going to report directly into, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're usually on the hiring committee as well. For smaller startups, probably like under 50, perhaps the CFO is also on the hiring committee just
Yeah.
to make sure the budget is being adhered to.
Yeah.
I will say though that the younger or more immature a company, it sounds weird, but there's very little guardrails. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would feel actually very comfortable. Some of the biggest pay increases for negotiations I've had
Mm-hmm.
has been on a personal level from smaller companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Larger companies, they're just a lot more restrictions. And even the time between, like, let's say they give out the initial offer and you counter that, it might take like a week or two, perhaps even more, for you to get a response. And by that time, like really good candidates are gone. And
Yeah.
so larger companies, they just tend to move a lot slower in the recruiting process.
Sure. That's so interesting because some of our absolute best performing clients have been going to Google. So the best increases we've seen have been Google and maybe Meta, but
AI related?
not necessarily. Well, yes, but also other roles as well. So I'm trying to envision. I want to be a fly on the wall. Let's take mid-sized company. I don't know which of the ones you've been at was mid-sized. I'm a hiring manager. I have an open role. How much am I paying for this, or whoever is posting the job post? What's happening behind the scenes? How is the budget determined for this role? So, just to give you what I'm looking for, I've advised a lot of startups and worked at some startups. We had an open role at one of the startups I was at. I was consulting for them. And there was an open role, and me, the CEO, and chief of staff slash head of HR recruiting got together. How much are we going to pay for this role? We looked it up on Carta. I was like, okay, our company size is this much, location San Francisco, fundraise this much. What's the role? How senior? And then it gave maybe like, I don't know, 250K base and then certain amount
Mhm.
of equity. And we're like, this is probably how much we should be paying. Let's start with an offer of 200 and see if we get good talent. If not, we can slowly ramp up to 250. This is like what I've seen in the background myself. Do you happen to have like a snapshot like that from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, first I would say Carta is a great resource. I've used Carta like on the employer side quite a lot. So they have a lot of good data that you can use on the employer side as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, like as long as you pay for it. Their equity data is probably unmatched in terms of the accuracy, right?
Yeah.
Because people will put their cap tables directly into the Carta system.
Yeah.
I would say that
Have you been in those meetings where people are deciding on the budget and Carta says this much, but we should probably start with this?
mhm. So I would say that's generally the practice for a smaller
Smaller
stage
company.
company,
Yeah.
or because right, you're going into the job hunt not knowing what you're going to pay.
Yeah.
Most people, they like larger companies, they'll know what they should generally pay
Yeah.
because, for example, Microsoft, they have tens of thousands of employees. Their internal pay database is probably so valuable, they don't
Yeah.
share that. And
Yeah.
so they already know what they're going to pay.
Yeah.
Like if you're a very senior role, you actually have probably a better chance at increasing your compensation at a small company if they're willing to spend the money on you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're going to be like a big fish in a little pond,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like maybe a medium fish in a humongous pond at Meta or like Microsoft. And so it kind of just depends on what you're looking for. I will say this: I have never seen a candidate get rejected for negotiating too hard. And so my
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah,
oh,
like I
you
would
haven't seen
always
it.
encourage people to negotiate. Everything, most things in life are negotiable,
Yes.
and you can kind of feel out your negotiating power. So for example, there's some questions you can ask like, "Oh, how long have you been looking for someone for this position?" Now, what does
Mm-hmm.
that tell you? It tells you, like, kinda how desperate that company is. It means
Yeah.
how long has that job been on the market? You
Mm-hmm.
could even ask, like, "Have you changed the pay scale since this job's been posted?" There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, like, small discovery things you can do to try to figure out how important is that position to the company, and then you can gauge your negotiating strategy. Do you want to be more aggressive? Do you want to be moderate? Or do you want to let the other side like set the anchor point? So it kind of just depends on that company. Specifically startups though, like I would look at what industry they're working in, right? So like AI is incredibly hot right now. If you're AI talent, I would say negotiate like as hard as you can. This is like your time to shine, right? It's
For
like a
sure.
gold rush. So
And work with us so you don't leave any money on the table.
and I don't think people feel comfortable negotiating with like AIs yet. So,
Yeah. So, one thing that I learned when I was working at salary.com a long time ago, and something that people might not realize is that, well, people know that there's pay bands internally. Let's say an associate makes this much, a manager
Mhm.
makes this much. But one thing that I realized was that you can be paid above the pay band. Like it's not a real ceiling. So, in your experience, do you have any insight as to there's a pay band or there's a budget? Who determines and how high or low the first offer is at, as well as if people keep negotiating and maybe they have other offers,
Mhm.
who determines and how if this person can be placed above the pay band?
Yeah, usually it's going to be the hiring manager that has that power at a larger company. At a smaller company, that power might lie with the CFO if they want to have a lot of control over the hiring process, because typically for a company, payroll is going to be your largest expense. And so it's really important to control those costs.
Mm-hmm.
At larger companies, that power can be delegated further down the ladder. And so a lot of times the hiring managers will be the ones that are setting the cap for that particular position. But the thing is, a lot of times the negotiation happens with the recruiter because you're really interacting with the recruiter, and the recruiter is then interacting on the back end with the hiring manager
Okay,
or
got it.
whoever the decision maker is. Yeah.
So it's the hiring manager typically for bigger companies who's like, our pay band is this much or the budget is this much. Let's come in a little lower to leave room for negotiation. And then if it's like a rare talent or for some reason you really want this person, they keep negotiating, then maybe the hiring manager is like, okay, well, they can be above the pay band, right?
Yes, I would say the more senior and then the more in demand your position, like a very senior researcher for AI, you would probably have you could probably set your pay, honestly, for a
Yeah.
for a large company. Of course, like being reasonable, but the thing is, for example, AI compensation right now is changing so rapidly. I would say 6 months of data is already it's too old.
Yes.
It's changing that quickly. And so it's
Changing in what way? Is it getting higher, or
getting
what are the
higher.
trends?
It's getting higher. You've seen increased hiring across the Mag 7 for AI. They're essentially competing with each other for talent. They're even poaching talent from each other. And so you can just imagine how competitive that landscape is. Really, that is going to be a buyer's market, meaning like the power lies with the employees in those particular fields. The thing is, you can also be a support role for companies that do AI. And in those cases, you also might have a lot more negotiating power. If you're like a powerhouse marketer, like a chief of marketing that only does AI related products, like you could probably demand quite a bit.
And we welcome those people to work with us so that they don't leave any money on the table.
So, Kevin, I had a few questions that will hopefully dispel some myths around negotiations because we often hear a lot of people who worry that if they negotiate, then they'll lose the offer. And I think that was very reassuring to hear from you that in your experience, you've never seen an offer being pulled just because a candidate is negotiating. There's probably some other reason, but that's not the primary factor.
Or have you seen any offers get pulled? Not from negotiation.
Not for negotiations, but sometimes like if for a lot of startups the finances change within 3 months and you're like, okay, we can't fill this position, so you'll rescind the offer. That happens a little bit more commonly depending on where we are in the macro cycle. Right now, macro environment's quite good. So during the bear,
Yeah.
in crypto. Like there were a lot of offers getting rescinded, obviously, because once your token gets devalued to a certain point, that affects your treasury because the treasury is made up of your particular token, whoever you're working for. And so there was a lot of rescinding offers. But I will say that I've never seen an offer get rescinded for negotiating too hard. I have seen offers get rescinded if you're rude, or if
Exactly.
you come entitled, or if you just don't have a good, they're going to say you're not a culture fit, which means like probably they didn't like your personality,
Yeah.
but they say it in a little bit, kinder way.
Yeah.
I've never seen an offer get pulled for negotiating too hard.
But yeah, and I assume that you being rude and entitled can show through the negotiation as well.
Correct, correct. It's generally you can see it as a negotiation is occurring, but to be honest, a lot of times the personality comes out also during the interviews.
Interviews, right? So it's not that they're like, oh, let's rescind the offer because this person asked for more, but they asked for more in a rude way, so that let's rescind the offer. Okay, it's
Correct,
a good distinction. Yeah,
correct. Or they were rude during the interview
right.
process, but it's a very strong talent. And so you're like trying to debate on the back end. You're like, they're asking for more,
Yeah,
but they're kind of like abrasive,
yeah,
like, and then that kind of like tips it over, right? You're like, oh, they're a little bit too abrasive. Nah, let's go with someone else.
right, right.
What about, so something we hear companies or recruiters or employers say a lot is they say up front that they don't negotiate. And we have heard this a lot. We've heard companies say, just so you know, the very first offer we give, that's our best and final. We have this company policy where we give you our best shot. We don't negotiate. There's no back and forth, yada, yada, yada. In our experience working with clients, whenever we've heard that, I don't think there has been a single case where that was actually true, where it has.
I mean, the company has stayed firm. That there have been a couple times where they said first offer is best and final, but I suspect that if the client had another offer, the company would have flexed because that also has happened.
Yeah. I think the only company that I can think of potentially is Netflix. They
That seems
they yeah, they tend to be
inflexible.
pretty hard to negotiate with, although they do pay extremely above market rate for the roles.
Yeah.
But even in my experience, there's this one company that I'm thinking of that I applied to that I got an offer from years ago. That every single conversation I had with the recruiter, he reinforced in every conversation, just so you know, we do not negotiate. The first offer we give is best and final. We're still a startup, but I have to talk to the founders about this because a lot of candidates are complaining about that. But just so you know, the policy right now we don't negotiate best and final. And then I had another offer, and I used that as leverage. After through the negotiation, I ultimately increased the offer by more than 200K. So that was a case in which I knew, when companies say this, don't necessarily take it at face value,
Yeah,
right?
I actually wanted to mention another example. When Alex was in grad school, in business school, he was interviewing with Meta, and Meta has this policy, at least at the time, had a policy of paying all MBAs who go for an internship the same amount. And actually, I think it was even for a role, because it's like they're all coming from the same business school and all that. But I do remember as we were trying to negotiate with them, they said we don't negotiate this, but do you have another offer? So it hinted at the fact that if they had another offer, they probably would negotiate.
So, Kevin, question for you is, when on your side of the negotiation table, how much room or buffer is built into an offer?
I mean, I will say this, even if the salary band is posted, the actual real salary band is probably in the hiring manager's head, or it's in another living in another document, because you're not going to post the actual cap. Otherwise, like that, you're just showing all your cards at that
Yeah.
point. There are a lot of tech companies that adhere to this first and final offer. If you're going to go down that strategy, there's a couple reasons why companies do that. It's for velocity. So if you're hiring at a very accelerated pace and you're negotiating every offer, it's going to take a really long time. It depends on the velocity of how you're going to try to go to market for that particular product or service. And then secondly, some companies, they have built out like compensation algorithms depending on level and experience. And so when you go through the hiring process, internally, each of the interviewers, they're going to give you like, hey, I think this person is at a level 3. And then the next person says, okay, maybe she's at a level 3.2. And everyone does their internal calculation of what that individual should be leveled at. And then they'll have a calculator on the back end. They literally just put in the average and they'll spit out whatever comp is on there. And that's kind of why the reason why I assume they're doing that is because states like California and New York have come out with pretty strong laws on if there's one position and you are hiring for that position, whether you're a man or a woman, if the experience level and the level is in the level that they're at is equivalent, they should be paid the same. And so we've moved towards, it's kind of weird in creating a lot of these laws. We've gone from a more negotiating friendly environment to a more heavy reliance on like compensation algorithms or compensation functions because companies are worried about this pay equity issue. And so this is one of the tools that is used to combat that. And so it depends on honestly the company size. Only really large companies will have super inflexible systems like that. But even really large companies, depending on your seniority and your value to the company, you might have a little bit more negotiating room. So I think honestly, my advice to job seekers is to be very honest with yourself on where you believe your power is in terms of like how much negotiating power do I actually have for this particular role in this particular company. It might be different for different companies, honestly.
Yeah, love that. Okay. So, what happens behind the scenes when a candidate asks for more than the initial offer? Who needs to approve it in your experience?
Yeah, I think I answered this a little bit earlier, but generally, like the hiring manager, often like probably the most common for larger companies, younger, more immature companies. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's the founder. If you're like 20 people and under, you're not going to have a dedicated HR. Generally, dedicated HR, like where you're hiring one role, one position for someone to be dedicated to human resources, of people ops, that generally doesn't happen in a company's life cycle until like probably 30 to 50 at the earliest. A lot of teams, they don't even have it until maybe 100. They'll outsource their human resources or people ops function. A lot of things are being outsourced now, like the business support functions, so that you can focus on the core product or service. Yeah.
So for bigger companies, our clients are usually negotiating with the recruiter pretty much always. If it's
Mhm.
mid-size and above. And so let's say they're negotiating, does the recruiter have some built-in leeway? Do they have, I don't know, 10K on the side as a gesture? Or do they always, for any amount, go and get some approvals? And if they're going to get approvals, you said they're going to the hiring manager. Maybe there's a compensation team or HR team.
Mhm.
If you have any insights into that process.
Yeah, so I would say that the recruiter generally has a band to engage with for the base salary component. I will say this though, so you have to also think about, is that recruiter an internal team or is it a vendor? Because vendors are generally paid a percentage of the
Yeah.
final salary. And so
Usually
the recruit,
internal. Yeah. We
yeah,
rarely
so
negotiate with vendors. Yeah.
like external recruiters. Yeah, external recruiters, their incentive is to pay the person as much as they want. So actually, they're your best friend.
Mm.
If it's internal HR, they obviously have some sort of range in the back of their head. They're probably working with the compensation team or the people ops team on the back end to see what's feasible. If you're unable to negotiate on base salary, what I would recommend is there are a lot of components
Yeah.
of compensation other than base salary that you can negotiate. For example, do you want a performance-based bonus if you're really confident of your performance? Because a lot of companies are more willing to have performance-based bonuses built in
Mhm.
because that doesn't mean that they have to pay it out, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be dependent on how well you do. And so they're usually a little bit more flexible with performance-based bonuses, especially when performance is one of the key metrics. So for example, recruiting, sales, these sort of like roles where numbers mean everything, performance-based bonuses are very, very, very common. Other roles like accounting, um, other support roles like that, you generally don't really have a lot of like your performance is a lot harder to gauge by the numbers. You're like, oh, okay, I'm on budget. Does that mean my performance is good? And so those roles typically they don't rely as heavily on performance-based bonuses. I've seen recruiters where their performance-based bonuses are actually higher than their base salary. That isn't uncommon for like the best
Mm.
recruiters.
Yeah. I see. Okay, that's helpful. So I'm almost tempted to ask for a role play scenario with you, but we don't have to do that if it's awkward. But maybe you can give us some phrases of a good negotiation or a
Mhm.
bad negotiation,
Or
whichever,
both.
or
I would
both.
love to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
things that you have seen when a job
You're
seeker
like, oh,
negotiates really well
right.
and that makes you and the company
Mhm.
decide to give more, and also cases when they negotiate very poorly. I think you already alluded to one factor, which is if they're rude or if they come off entitled. But if there are other things that people do when they try to negotiate that just has you just put up your defenses or not extend an offer or not increase.
Yeah, I know this is going to sound a little bad, but I guess the more negotiating power you have a little bit more flexibility with just like being rude, to be frank. I would never recommend you be that way, but if you're a very junior role, you should be fairly careful with what you're saying, what you're sharing, what you're willing to disclose, because it's odd, but like the scrutiny is like even higher sometimes with the more junior roles than the more senior roles. I will say the recruiters do often have a good amount of leeway with the base salary. And so in sales, they want to root for you because the recruiter's performance is actually tied to something called time to close. So how
Mhm.
long it takes for them to close a role. Basically from when the position is posted on the job board, how long does it take to
Yeah.
close that position? Ideally, you cut that down as low as you can. I've seen some companies, their time to close is 20 to 30 days. That's pretty standard. In very high velocity industries, you can cut that down to 14, 10. I've
Mhm.
seen like if you can get under 7 days, that's really good because you're basically filling roles in a week.
Yeah.
Um, and that means your processes are very efficient at that
Mhm.
point. And your recruiters probably have a good amount of leeway in
Mhm.
terms of what to negotiate.
Is that from offer to the candidate signing, or you mean even including interviews?
I would include the interviews
Okay.
in
Wow,
that there
7 days from first contact until signing. That's aggressive. That's wow.
yeah. So when 2021 when crypto was booming, a lot of companies were hiring that rapidly because the industry was accelerating that quickly.
Wow.
I can imagine with AI right now, I would not be surprised if they had some time to close periods of a week or less because of how quickly they're building those teams. That doesn't mean it's a good practice because you typically give up some things when you're closing that quickly. For example, due diligence. There's only so much you can conduct in that time. Also, you have a very shortened, probably interview process. I've seen some companies have 5 to 10 interviews. I've seen people do only 3 rounds of interviews. It just depends.
I guess you said don't be rude, but is there any, have you heard any wild phrasings?
No, but I can tell you something that is a good thing to do, and this always because when I'm recruiting, I notice this. I share it internally in Slack with my teams too. Is whenever a candidate sends a thank you note, hopefully one that's not written by ChatGPT, you
Right.
make it personalized. Usually you have a conversation with the recruiter. Try to pick out something about perhaps something that they've shared personally about their
Specific?
life.
Yes. Hmm.
Specific, exactly. And so they will recall that this person remembers this thing that I shared with them,
Yeah.
and it'll keep you top of mind.
I love
Those
that.
things are really special. So the more personal you can make it,
Yeah.
the better. That's not going to get you the role if you're not a good
Right.
candidate. But if you have a couple good candidates that you are also in the running with, that's another way that you can use to stand out is doing like a thank you note and a follow up to all your interviewers, including the hiring manager. Because the interviewers and the hiring manager, they're in constant communication with each other. It
Hmm.
isn't just I interview you, I give you my grade or my performance evaluation, and then it's done. The hiring manager and the interview panel, they're generally in pretty close coordination. Sometimes they'll have periodic stand ups or meetings to see how the recruiting process is going. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that because we all know a candidate is probably talking to several companies. And so the fact that they took the time to remember and follow up on a specific thing that the recruiter or someone else said, the hiring manager, it shows excitement about the opportunity.
Mhm.
And a lot of people wonder, we've had some clients that are like, oh, should I play hard to get because it will make me seem cooler? And they might assume that showing this attention to detail and care, it lowers their value or makes them seem more desperate. But I don't think that's the case at all. And when they go and negotiate, part of the negotiation is going to be a little bit
Hmm.
persistent and all that. And so this attention to detail and care will soften the persistent part of the negotiation. The
Yeah.
other, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a good point in terms of the persistence. I will say this, when someone decides to start negotiating with you, they don't typically have open negotiations with multiple candidates because there's one role, one seat, right?
Yes,
And so I'm going to have negotiations for one candidate. If that fails, then I move on to the other candidate.
right.
If you have negotiations going on with two candidates at the same time, what if they both accept? What are you going to do?
Exactly.
For,
Yes, we say the
and so
same thing. Yeah.
and so I was going to say, typically, if someone has chosen to negotiate the compensation with you, that means that you're a pretty strong candidate they've chosen to move forward with.
Yeah.
And so this is your moment to negotiate because once you're done with this process, they're going to move on to the next candidate if you choose to decline it.
Right. And I want to caveat that with we're assuming that the candidate has a formal offer, not just a verbal offer, because we have seen
Hmm.
companies sometimes just never go from verbal offer to actual written offer when a candidate negotiates. And then the candidate is so surprised, but maybe they negotiated too aggressively and never was never moved to a formal offer. I also wanted to touch on, you said the thank you note should not be obvious that it's written by ChatGPT or other AI tools. We offer clients a lot of templates and language around how to phrase things. I mean, obviously, we love AI. We're in the middle of Silicon Valley here, but we never use ChatGPT or anything like that for that. I feel like the only time we use ChatGPT is I'm thinking of a word, but it's not coming. What's the synonym for, I don't know, grateful? So you want to say it in different ways.
Yeah, and it's I feel like these days it's really easy to tell when
Yeah.
someone's using ChatGPT. First of all, you see the M dashes a
M
lot.
dashes and
Oh
not
my God.
not
M
only
dashes, do not use M dash. No one's ever used an M dash before 2024.
yeah.
Like
It's so
I've
real.
never.
I never knew what it was called
Yeah.
until ChatGPT became super
I
Yeah.
popular.
think it's also the, I don't know if people have noticed, it's also the, not only this, but that. Not only am I grateful for the opportunity, but also I think I'll be a great fit for the role.
So, Kevin, other mistakes that candidates make when negotiating, so if they come off rude or if they seem like they're entitled, what are other things that have turned you off or the hiring manager off in the middle of the negotiation?
To be honest, I don't often get turned off by negotiations. I think it's because I come to the table knowing that each person at the negotiating table is trying to advocate for their strongest position, right? The company actually, believe it or not, like the company isn't trying to like lowball you every single time. Sometimes they'll give you a high offer because they don't want to negotiate. I've seen companies go down that route. And these are the companies that say first and final offer because they've decided to index on velocity rather than this negotiation. Negotiating with a candidate can probably prolong the hiring process by quite a bit, right? Because you're going back and forth. There could be a couple rounds of negotiations. And so from when the actual offer is given to when the final offer is accepted, that could be like 2 or 3 weeks, right? And so for like really high velocity companies, that might be unsustainable. And so they just choose, we're going to pay at the 95th, 99 percentile. And this is why I say check levels, because you can gauge where a company's pay band is at. If you look at other comparable companies, you can see, am I kind of at the median? Am I at the 75th percentile, the 90th percentile, the 95th percentile? Most companies do not pay at the 90th percentile, right? Like that makes sense. Like logically,
Right, yeah.
very few companies will pay at that particular level. And so you need to be really, you need to understand the landscape of who you're competing with and then also the companies that you're interviewing for so that you can negotiate like more knowledgeably, I guess, because you could be negotiating really hard for a company that like just traditionally has never just doesn't negotiate compensation, and you can talk to former employees and they'll know like what the compensation practices are if they've been at the company long enough. Ideally you talk to someone from the HR, the people ops team, because they're definitely going to know. I don't know if they're going to want to talk to you, but if
Yeah.
you know, if you
Be
have some sort of
careful. Yeah.
network, You like that person will know what that company's hiring practices are, how they negotiate, are you able to negotiate, what's typically acceptable. I will say if I was just gonna like do like a ballpark guess, I will say you could probably negotiate like 20% higher for most positions, just guessing. But like I think I had a negotiating
Weekly
professor.
base or total comp?
Either. I would One of my negotiating professors, they always told me like if you don't ask, you won't get anything. So like just ask. There's nothing there, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, our company MO is you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate.
Yeah, I love that. That's good.
Oh, I do have one follow-up question to that. What about when you have seen candidates either ask for too much or may they ask for something what may feel unreasonable? How does that land for you, and does that potentially ruin their candidacy or the negotiation? Or do you just say
Uh,
no?
well, on the HR side, it's a pain for me because if they break the compensation function, I need to figure out how to fix it, or I need to figure out how to put them in it. So on an HR side, it's a little bit of a pain because you're like talking to legal, you're like, yeah, can I do this? What are other people getting paid around the same?
Yeah.
But I would just say ask for it, even if it's unreasonable. You as the candidate will not know internally what the company has to offer. Now, if there's publicly available information, like they just got a new funding round, that's a different matter, right? Like use all the resources you can, especially in the digital age. We have so much information at our fingertips. If you really like a company, do as much research on like what their financial status is. You can figure out like go to LinkedIn, see the people that are joining their company, see, and there's like I think there's like a little graph even it says headcount growth over the last 6 or 12 months. Look at the headcount growth. Are they growing or are they shrinking? Right? That'll kind of tell you the gauge of health for that particular company. But I would say shoot high because you don't know what you can get if you don't ask for it. If you are a more senior role, you have more flexibility in being very aggressive with your negotiations. I have seen people ask for things beyond the band, and if they're a high quality talent, exceptions will always be made. Like rules are made to be broken, right?
Love
So
that.
there's
Love
always
that.
exceptions.
I love that, especially coming from a former attorney.
That's
Speaking
why,
of
that's why I work in tech now, you know?
yeah. Speaking of the legal aspect of things, I'm curious, this is maybe a little too specific, but we have clients who are negotiating severance packages. Do they have
Upon hire?
sorry?
Upon hire? Upon
No,
like
no,
No,
no.
when
oh,
if they get
When
laid
no,
off.
yeah, they get
really
laid off.
rare.
Do they have any, could they possibly have any leverage other than just asking nicely, like appealing to the good nature of people could someone get,
I will say actually asking nicely is probably going to be your best bet. And the
okay,
reason being,
yes,
you know how we have the pay equity issue, like pay
yeah,
discrimination, that arguably applies to severance
severances,
packages. And
exactly.
when you're doing severance, oftentimes you're doing it as part of layoff. So there's going to be thousands of people. But people make an exception for you, they're going to have to make an exception for everyone.
Yeah,
And so it kind of depends. Are you being fired as part of a layoff? You're going to have very little negotiating power. Or are you part of a like very specific restructuring of the
mm-hmm.
company? Then there might be a little bit more flexibility. So you kind of have
Mm-hmm.
to see,
The
is your
contract,
team being downsized? Is your company being downsized? What's the organizational change that's occurring?
yeah. Okay, great. But so there's not really, other than nice asking nicely. I mean, I guess if you're part of a protected class, can you hint at, oh, I might pursue legal action? Like, how would you, let's say you're getting laid off, knock on wood, like, what are some things you're going through as you're negotiating the severance package? What are some things you're thinking about how to approach this?
Mhm. You know what, honestly, if you're being laid off, you just have very little negotiating
Yeah,
power, to be frank.
yeah,
I would say what I've seen work in the past is not, I'm not saying to take advantage of this, but HR and people ops professionals, we are humans too.
mm,
And so oftentimes if you're explaining and you're being honest about
yeah,
some sort of hardship,
yeah,
about losing this job, for example, you're starting a new family,
mm-hmm,
you have a large medical procedure. I
mm-hmm,
have sometimes seen exceptions being made depending on circumstances. I would say don't lie because you don't want to get caught.
right,
Be as honest as you can, be as truthful as you can, but I have seen some exceptions be made. It's not usually a lot, but it's enough to make the person like feel like that was like a good exchange.
Yeah.
And generally, if you are a large company, you want your employees, but also the people that leave your company to be happy because word of mouth means everything. And so, even if, for example, for the companies that I've worked at, even if we are laying people off, we try to provide as much resources as we can for those individuals, whether it is a financial package, which is often the case, or like access to like, support networks or other recruiters that are trying to hire for other companies. There's a
Mhm.
lot of things that kind of occur on the back end. And I would say that if there's something that you want, ask for it. What I've seen really commonly asked for is an extension of Cobra. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times when you get laid off, companies might offer you 6 months of Cobra, 12 months of Cobra, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I would say that's
And
probably
Cobra is health insurance, right? Yeah.
correct health insurance after you leave your company. And I would say insurance is so expensive now. It could be 800 or $1,000 a month. So that's a great actually thing to ask for.
Yeah.
And companies, they know insurance is difficult in the US. A lot of insurers are willing to budge on that.
Okay, I love that.
To clarify, Kevin, so you said, I mean, across the board in any severance situation, you have very little negotiating power. But earlier you had mentioned there are certain situations where you might have a little bit more. What was it around the team structuring or a company
Oh,
restructuring? What was
yes.
that?
If the company is doing a company layoff, you're going to have almost no negotiating
Yeah.
power because their financial health has come to a point where they just can't hire they can't hire you or they can't
Hmm.
employ you. Asking for more money in the severance package, they're probably already trying to give you as much as they can safely because they still have to ensure the health of the company for everyone else who's remaining employed, right?
Right.
Hmm.
If
Yes.
your team is undergoing, if a smaller team is undergoing some sort of restructuring, you might have a little bit more leeway. You just
I
gotta have to
see.
think about who's getting fired with you. Is it going to be a lot of people or very few people?
Yeah.
If it's
Mm.
very few people, you have more negotiating power. If there's a lot, it's just not going to be scalable for them to negotiate those severance offers. So you have probably very little.
So regardless of small or big group of people being laid off, I assume the company wants some reassurance that you will not go tell everyone, "Oh, I got this exception made." Is it worth mentioning that upfront? I have some hardship. I would really appreciate you increasing my severance package. Can you just straight up say, "I promise not to share with anyone else"? How would you navigate that
I think this is like a very moot question, and I'll tell you why. Most severance packages, they have you're basically waiving liability to the company. So you're basically saying, I'm not going to sue the company for everything. And then also there's probably confidentiality clause. If
Mm,
there isn't, then they probably don't have internal legal and like they're not doing a good job.
right.
The a lot of the reasons you give severance, you will always tie some sort of benefit to the company. And so the benefit is getting basically your adherence to not talk about anything negative, to not talk
Mm,
anything negatively about the company.
mhm.
It could be a lot of things, but also a lot of times they say you can't disclose the terms of your severance to others.
Right. But you haven't signed yet. So, do you, as the candidate, before signing severance, do you recommend that the candidate go in and say, "Hey, I have this hardship. Can you make an exception or can you extend this and that? By the way, I promise not to talk about it with anyone." Like,
Well, yeah, I think you can promise it, but usually for me, at least employees, I don't really trust promises. I always
okay.
need some sort of signature. What
Yeah.
will happen is they can say, well, if they're gonna give you the money, they'll offer you something different. And then before you get the severance amount deposited, you're gonna have to sign the agreement, which basically says you will not disclose the terms of this to anyone else. At least that's what I would expect as an attorney for most companies to do. And I've seen most companies do this in practice. I've very rarely seen a company not do this because you're not just going to give out a severance without any strings attached to it. The
Sure.
company's going to get some sort of benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Got it.
So I'd be remiss if we didn't ask this since you are a former
Yeah.
attorney.
And then we wrap this up.
And what, yeah, and I think we could wrap it up. But when candidates are accepting offers, what clauses or fine print do candidates often overlook that can have big either compensation implications or other implications on their career or their job? Something that comes to mind that you think people should always be looking at.
Well, I'm not going to give legal advice here, but I will say that most offer letters, they're not binding. Employment is at will, meaning
Oh,
you
true.
can terminate employment at any time. Most offer letters, they're just given to you. You're not signing anything, right? And so although it is a written offer, that offer can be rescinded. Oftentimes those clauses are even directly found in the offer letter. What I would triple check is to make sure whatever you negotiated is in the agreement.
Mhm.
Don't if the employer's like, hey, like I know we talked about this, but this is our standard offer letter. I don't want to put it in because our legal has to draft it and we need to do something special with it. And you're the only person who has this. Don't let that fly because if it's not written down, it almost like never happened. And so even though the offer letter is not binding, I would still try to have them put it in there because that's honestly just better than nothing. You want whatever the terms that you've negotiated to be in the offer letter if you can.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess it also matters, for example, if it's an early stage startup, there's all these things like how much equity is set aside for employees, and if they sell, who gets paid first. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so for equity agreements, it's going to depend on the type of equity you have, honestly. A lot of times your power in terms of negotiating the equity packages might be limited just because there's a lot of when you're dealing with any sort of regulated securities, there's just a lot less you can negotiate. There's a lot of constraints on the business side. On cash compensation, there's obviously a lot less regulation. You just can't be discriminatory. And so I would say that for cash comp, that would probably be your best bet in terms of negotiating compensation. Equity structure tends to be a lot more structured. And along with that, for Web3 crypto companies, token compensation is also usually a lot more structured.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking all this time to chat with us and letting us grill you on exactly your thoughts on this topic. We cashed in on our friendship here.
Yeah, I was also just doing the math of how long Kevin and I have been friends, and I think we can officially use the phrase we've been friends for a quarter century.
Oh, wow.
I think it has, yeah, almost been a quarter century. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
That's amazing.
But Kevin, thank you so much for joining us and spending an hour with us to chat
Yes, thank
about
you.
all things negotiations, compensation, legal, all that stuff. We really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time. And if your candidates want a job, they can also apply to Polaris. I'll do a little
Yes.
plug for my company.
Yeah,
Well, you did say that they wouldn't get an offer rescinded if they negotiate. So you
so
made it
they
so
better.
easy. You made it so easy for them. Yeah.
Just don't be rude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be rude.
Awesome. Well,
Awesome.
thanks so much, Kevin. Appreciate you coming on, and we will send this episode to you once it's published.
Of
Okay.
course. Thank you all.